At 1:23 a.m. on April 26, 1986, a catastrophic explosion tore through reactor number 4 of the Chernobyl Nuclear Power Plant near Pripyat, Ukraine. This moment marked the beginning of a disaster that would have far-reaching consequences, not just for the immediate area, but for the entire world. The explosion was so powerful that it could be felt miles away, shaking the very foundations of the nearby city of Pripyat. What began as a routine safety test spiraled into the world's worst nuclear disaster, forever etching Chernobyl into history as a symbol of human error and the devastating power of the atom. The test was meant to simulate a power outage to ensure the reactor could be safely shut down, but a combination of design flaws and operator errors led to an uncontrollable chain reaction. The reactor's core overheated, causing a massive explosion that released a deadly cloud of radioactive material. The explosion, a blinding flash of light followed by a deafening roar, ripped the roof off the reactor building, spewing radioactive material high into the night sky. This radioactive cloud spread quickly, carried by the wind, contaminating everything in its path. The initial explosion was just the beginning. Fires broke out, further complicating the already dire situation. Firefighters who rushed to the scene were unaware of the lethal levels of radiation they were being exposed to. The nearby city of Pripyat, home to many of the plant's workers and their families, remained oblivious to the disaster unfolding just miles away. The city was a model of Soviet urban planning, with modern amenities and a vibrant community. On that fateful night, the streets were quiet and the residents were asleep, completely unaware of the catastrophe that was about to engulf their lives. Unaware of the invisible danger raining down upon them, residents continued their sleep, unaware that their lives were about to change forever. The radioactive particles began to settle on the city, contaminating the air, water, and soil. By the time the residents woke up, the radiation levels were already dangerously high, but the full extent of the disaster was still unknown to them. It wasn't until later that day that the evacuation order was given, but by then the damage had already been done. The explosion at Chernobyl was not a natural disaster. It was a man-made catastrophe rooted in design flaws, a flawed safety test, and a disregard for safety protocols. The reactor's design was inherently unstable, and the operators were not adequately trained to handle the emergency. The safety systems that should have prevented such a disaster were either disabled or failed to function as intended. This tragic event exposed the vulnerabilities in the Soviet nuclear program and led to significant changes in nuclear safety regulations worldwide. The events of that fateful night serve as a chilling reminder of the importance of nuclear safety and the devastating consequences when those safeguards fail. The Chernobyl disaster not only caused immediate loss of life and long-term health issues for those exposed to radiation, but also left a lasting scar on the environment. The area around the reactor, known as the Exclusion Zone, remains uninhabitable to this day, a haunting testament to the destructive power of nuclear energy when it is not properly controlled. The lessons learned from Chernobyl continue to influence nuclear policies and safety measures around the world, ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again. The explosion at Chernobyl was the culmination of a series of errors and misjudgments, a catastrophic event that would forever change the course of nuclear energy history. Ironically, it occurred during a safety test designed to simulate a power outage, a test that was supposed to ensure the reactor's safety in case of an emergency. The test, intended to assess the reactor's ability to cool itself in an emergency, was delayed and poorly executed. The operators were under immense pressure to complete the test, leading to rushed decisions and overlooked protocols. A combination of design flaws in the RBMK-1000 reactor, coupled with operator errors, led to an uncontrolled chain reaction. The reactor's design had inherent safety issues that were not fully understood or addressed by the operators. The reactor's power output surged uncontrollably, creating a massive power surge that the reactor was not equipped to handle. The operators tried to shut down the reactor, but the control rods, instead of stabilizing the reactor, exacerbated the situation. This surge led to a rapid increase in temperature and pressure within the reactor core, causing a steam explosion that ripped through the reactor vessel. The intense heat caused the fuel rods to rupture, releasing radioactive materials. The force of the explosion was so powerful that it blew the reactor's heavy steel and concrete lid off, exposing the reactor core to the atmosphere. This catastrophic breach released a massive amount of radioactive particles into the air, leading to widespread contamination and long-term environmental damage. The explosion ignited a raging inferno that burned for days, releasing massive amounts of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Firefighters, many unaware of the invisible danger they faced, rushed to the scene to battle the blaze. They fought valiantly, their heroism preventing an even greater catastrophe. The fire, fueled by the graphite used to moderate the nuclear reaction, sent a plume of radioactive smoke and debris high into the atmosphere. This plume, carried by wind currents, spread radioactive contamination across vast swaths of the Soviet Union and Europe. The immediate aftermath of the explosion was chaotic. Emergency responders, ill-equipped to deal with a nuclear disaster of this magnitude, struggled to contain the situation. The initial response from the Soviet government was one of secrecy and denial. Fearful of the political fallout, Soviet officials downplayed the severity of the disaster, initially attempting to cover up the extent of the catastrophe. Information about the accident was tightly controlled, with the outside world largely kept in the dark about the true scale of the disaster. This delay in information hampered international efforts to provide assistance and assess the full impact of the disaster. It was not until days later, when radiation levels spiked across Europe, that the Soviet Union was forced to acknowledge the true extent of the disaster. The world watched in horror as the true scale of the tragedy unfolded. The invisible killer, radiation, left its mark on thousands exposed in the days and weeks following the explosion. The immediate effects of the disaster were devastating, with firefighters and plant workers on the front lines bearing the brunt of the radiation exposure. Many of these first responders suffered from acute radiation sickness, a debilitating and often fatal condition caused by high doses of radiation. The long-term health consequences of the disaster continue to plague survivors to this day. One of the most significant long-term health effects has been a dramatic increase in thyroid cancer, particularly among children exposed to radioactive iodine released from the reactor. The Chernobyl disaster highlighted the long-lasting and insidious nature of radiation exposure, with its effects often not manifesting for years or even decades after the initial event. The Chernobyl disaster left behind a legacy of environmental devastation. The explosion and subsequent release of radioactive material contaminated a vast area, rendering it uninhabitable for generations to come. The area surrounding the Chernobyl plant, known as the Exclusion Zone, encompasses a 30-kilometer radius around the reactor. This zone, heavily contaminated with radioactive material, remains largely uninhabited, a stark reminder of the disaster's lasting impact. While the Exclusion Zone remains off-limits to permanent residents, it has become an unexpected haven for wildlife. In the absence of human activity, plant and animal life have flourished, showcasing nature's resilience in the face of adversity. The Chernobyl disaster sent shockwaves through the global nuclear industry, prompting a worldwide reassessment of nuclear safety protocols and reactor designs. In the wake of the disaster, international organizations, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, implemented stricter safety regulations and enhanced cooperation to prevent future accidents. The disaster highlighted the importance of transparency and international cooperation following nuclear accidents. The Chernobyl accident spurred the development of international conventions on nuclear safety and early notification in case of nuclear accidents. The lessons learned from Chernobyl have been applied to the design and operation of nuclear power plants worldwide, making them significantly safer than their predecessors. The disaster serves as a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, safety, and the need to prioritize human life above all else. The Chernobyl disaster stands as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of human error. On that fateful day in April 1986, a routine safety test spiraled out of control, leading to one of the worst nuclear disasters in history. The explosion at Reactor 4 released a massive amount of radioactive material into the atmosphere, affecting not just the immediate area, but spreading across Europe. The events of April 26, 1986, forever changed the world's perception of nuclear power, highlighting the need for stringent safety measures, robust regulation, and a culture of safety within the nuclear industry. The disaster underscored the importance of having well-trained personnel and effective emergency response plans. Chernobyl's legacy extends beyond the immediate impact of the explosion. The disaster serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of secrecy. The initial response by the Soviet government was marked by denial and a lack of transparency, which only exacerbated the situation. This lack of openness delayed critical international assistance and increased the suffering of those affected. The importance of transparency in the face of such events cannot be overstated. As we move forward, it is essential to remember the lessons learned from Chernobyl and to remain vigilant in our pursuit of safe and sustainable energy sources. The memory of Chernobyl serves as a powerful reminder that the pursuit of technological advancement must always be tempered by a commitment to safety, responsibility, and the well-being of both present and future generations. The sacrifices made by the brave liquidators who risked their lives to contain the disaster should never be forgotten. Their courage and dedication are a testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of adversity.